The morning sun cut sharp angles through the glass towers of downtown Atlanta, painting the sidewalks in gold and casting long shadows from the oak trees lining Peachtree Street. The air carried that peculiar warmth of early autumn, where summer refused to fully release its grip, but the leaves had already begun their slow surrender to bronze and amber. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stood at the window of the third-floor conference room, her reflection ghosting against the cityscape beyond. Behind her, the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the distant chatter of the bullpen, but her attention remained fixed on the folder sitting open on the polished table. At her feet, Max lifted his head, ears rotating like satellite dishes tracking an invisible signal. The Belgian Malinois had been dozing in a patch of sunlight near her boots, but something in her stillness had pulled him from his rest. He watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, reading her posture the way he read scent trails in the field. 7 years together had taught him every variation of her moods, and right now, something had shifted. Sarah turned from the window and looked down at her partner. Max thumped his tail once against the carpet. A question and a reassurance rolled into one simple gesture. She allowed herself a small smile, reaching down to scratch behind his ear, before returning her attention to the documents spread before her. The audit report had arrived on her desk 40 minutes ago, flagged urgent by the Internal Technology Division. Routine reviews of bodycam footage were standard procedure, a quality control measure implemented 2 years prior to ensure equipment functionality and proper documentation protocols. Most audits passed without incident, noting only minor issues like corrupted timestamps or officers forgetting to activate their cameras during vehicle stops. This one was different. Incident Report 7734B, October 3rd, Industrial District, Warehouse Row, K-9 Unit Deployment, Officer Collins, Lieutenant, K-9 Max, Badge 891, Alert logged at 22:47, duration of deployment 94 minutes, footage status, file not found. Sarah read the words again, though she had already memorized them. File not found. 3 words that should have been impossible. The bodycam system utilized redundant storage, automatic cloud backup, and physical server archives. Files did not simply vanish. They could be corrupted, certainly. They could be mislabeled or stored in wrong directories. But complete deletion required administrative access, deliberate action, and a paper trail that should have triggered immediate flags in the system. No flags had been triggered. The audit had only caught the discrepancy because a junior technician named Marcus Webb had been running a new diagnostic algorithm he had developed on his own time, cross-referencing deployment logs with storage manifests. The algorithm had found the gap. Without it, the missing file might have gone unnoticed indefinitely. Sarah closed the folder and checked her watch. She had 15 minutes before her meeting with Captain Morrison to discuss the findings, 15 minutes to organize her thoughts around a night she remembered clearly but had not thought about in weeks. The warehouse operation had been unremarkable at the time. An anonymous tip about stolen electronics being stored in an abandoned facility on the south end of Warehouse Row. She and Max had been dispatched as part of a 4-officer team to investigate. They had found nothing: empty crates, dust, the lingering smell of motor oil, and old cardboard. Max had alerted near the loading dock, his signal strong and insistent, but the subsequent search had revealed only concrete floors and rusted shelving. The case had been closed as a false lead, the kind of dead end that populated police work more often than the public realized. But now, someone had erased the evidence of that night. Someone with access and motive and the technical knowledge to circumvent security protocols. The question that pulsed beneath Sarah's thoughts was simple and unsettling. What had Max actually found that made someone want to bury it? She gathered the folder and tucked it under her arm. Max rose immediately, shaking off sleep and falling into position at her left heel. They moved through the bullpen together, drawing the usual mix of nods and greetings from officers at their desks. Sarah returned them automatically, her mind already 3 steps ahead, mapping the conversation she was about to have. Captain David Morrison's office occupied the corner of the 3rd floor, its windows offering views of both the street below and the central atrium of the precinct. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with close-cropped grey hair and the weathered patience of someone who had spent 3 decades navigating departmental politics. When Sarah knocked on his open door, he looked up from his computer screen and waved her in. Max padded across the threshold and settled into his usual spot near the filing cabinet, a position that gave him sightlines to both the door and the windows. Morrison watched the dog with the faint amusement he always showed around the K-9 unit, a mix of respect and bemusement at having a 4-legged officer under his command. Sarah took the chair across from his desk and placed the folder between them. Morrison glanced at it, but did not reach for it. He already knew what it contained. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence held the weight of unasked questions and uncertain implications. Morrison leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, studying Sarah with an expression she could not quite read. Finally, he spoke. "Walk me through that night again, everything you remember." Sarah had expected the request. She organized her thoughts and began. "We received the tip at approximately 2100 hours. Anonymous caller, male voice, claimed to have seen suspicious activity at the old Granger storage facility. Said trucks had been coming and going at odd hours, loading and unloading crates. Dispatch flagged it for K-9 involvement because the caller mentioned the possibility of narcotics, though he admitted he was only guessing based on the behavior patterns." Morrison nodded. "Go on. I was partnered with Officers Chen and Rodriguez for the initial approach, with Officer Dawkins providing perimeter support. We arrived at 2132 and conducted a preliminary sweep of the exterior. No vehicles present, no signs of recent activity. The facility had been officially closed for 18 months, but the locks on the main entrance showed signs of recent use. Fresh scratches in the metal, lubricant on the mechanisms. Sarah paused, recalling the details with the precision that fieldwork demanded. Morrison waited. "We entered through the main loading bay. Chen and Rodriguez cleared the front offices while Max and I worked the warehouse floor. The space was mostly empty, old shelving units, some pallets, scattered debris. Max showed mild interest in several areas, but nothing definitive until we reached the southeast corner near the secondary loading dock. That is where he alerted." "Yes, sir. Full alert. Sat and stared at a specific section of the floor. I called Chen over to document while I examined the area. Concrete floor, no visible seams or irregularities. We checked for hollow spaces, false panels, anything that might explain his reaction. Found nothing." Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly, and the bodycam was functioning throughout. "I activated it when we exited the vehicle, per protocol. Green light confirmed recording. I checked it twice during the operation because I wanted documentation of Max's alert. Both times the indicator showed active recording, so the footage existed. It had to. The system logged 94 minutes of deployment. That data came from the camera itself, time-stamped and uploaded automatically when I docked the unit at the end of shift. The file was created. Someone deleted it after the fact." Morrison picked up the folder and opened it, though Sarah suspected he had already read every page. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tension in his jaw, the subtle tell of a man who did not like the implications of what lay before him. "The deletion required level 3 access," he said. "That narrows our pool considerably." Sarah had already done that math. Level 3 access was restricted to senior administrators, IT supervisors, and a handful of command staff. Perhaps 20 people in the entire department. 20 people who could have reached into the system and erased a file without leaving obvious fingerprints. "Marcus Webb flagged this," Morrison continued. "Good kid, sharp." He is requesting permission to run a deeper diagnostic, try to recover fragments, or trace the deletion pathway. I think we should let him. Morrison set the folder down and met her eyes. This could get complicated, Collins. If someone inside this building deliberately destroyed evidence, we are looking at potential criminal charges against one of our own. Internal affairs will need to be involved. There will be scrutiny, suspicion, people looking sideways at colleagues they have worked with for years. I understand. Do you? Because once we open this door, we cannot close it. Careers could be damaged, reputations ruined. Even if we find nothing actionable, the investigation itself will leave marks. Sarah felt Max shift at her feet, responding to the tension in the room. She reached down and rested her hand on his head, drawing steadiness from his presence. With respect, Captain, someone already opened that door. They opened it the moment they deleted that file. Whatever they are trying to hide, whatever Max found that night, they made a choice to cover it up. That is not a door we can pretend does not exist. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. His shoulders settled, a decision made. All right. I will authorize Webb's diagnostic. Keep this quiet for now. Until we know what we are dealing with, I want a minimal footprint. You and Max continue normal duties, but in your off hours, I want you reviewing everything connected to that warehouse. Previous calls, ownership records, anything that might tell us why someone cared enough to bury this. Sarah rose, collecting the folder. Max stood with her, tail swaying in anticipation of movement. One more thing, Morrison added as she reached the door. Be careful, Collins. Whoever did this is smart enough to cover their tracks. That means they are smart enough to notice if someone starts digging. The warning settled into her thoughts as she walked back through the bullpen. Max matched her pace, alert and attentive, reading her energy the way he always did. She wondered what he remembered of that night, whether the scent that had triggered his alert still lingered somewhere in his extraordinary memory. Dogs experienced the world through smell the way humans experienced it through sight. And Max's nose had never failed her. Whatever he had detected in that warehouse, it had been real, concrete and undeniable. Now she needed to find out what it was. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of routine patrols and quiet investigation. Sarah and Max worked their regular shifts, responding to calls that ranged from a reported break-in that turned out to be a confused elderly man entering the wrong apartment to a traffic stop that uncovered a modest quantity of counterfeit designer handbags in someone's trunk. The counterfeit case led to a cheerful arrest, the driver more embarrassed than defiant, and paperwork that consumed most of an afternoon. In the spaces between duties, Sarah dug into the history of the Granger storage facility. The building had operated as a legitimate warehousing business for nearly 30 years before closing, due to declining demand and rising maintenance costs. Ownership had transferred twice in the past 5 years, first to a holding company based in Delaware, then to a local LLC with a name that meant nothing to her. Riverside Development Partners. A quick search revealed minimal online presence, no clear business activities, and a registered agent whose office address corresponded to a mailbox rental store in Buckhead. Shell Company. Sarah muttered to herself, scrolling through the sparse results. Max lifted his head from where he lay beneath her desk, ears pricking at the sound of her voice. She reached down to reassure him. Just thinking out loud, partner. The ownership trail suggested deliberate obscurity, someone or someones who wanted distance between themselves and the property. That alone was not criminal. Many legitimate businesses used similar structures for tax purposes or liability protection, but combined with the deleted footage and the anonymous tip, a pattern began to emerge. The warehouse was not abandoned. It was being used carefully and quietly for something that required secrecy. On the 4th day, Marcus Webb sent her an encrypted message through the department's internal system. He had found something, They met in one of the basement server rooms, a climate-controlled space filled with the hum of cooling fans and the blinking lights of networked equipment. Marcus was a slight young man with wire-rimmed glasses and the perpetually rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time with code than people. He greeted Sarah with nervous enthusiasm, clearly excited by his discovery, but equally aware of its implications. Max sniffed around the room with professional interest, cataloguing the unfamiliar scents of electronics and processed air. Sarah let him explore while she focused on the monitor Marcus had pulled up. "So the file itself is gone," Marcus explained, fingers dancing over the keyboard, completely wiped, overwritten with null data to prevent recovery. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. But here is the thing. He paused, adjusting his glasses. They missed the metadata cache. Sarah leaned closer. "Explain that to me like I did not pay attention during computer training." Marcus smiled, warming to his subject. "Every time a file is created or modified in our system, a small packet of information gets logged separately. Filler name, creation time, last access, file size. It is meant for indexing and quick retrieval, not storage. Most people do not even know it exists. The cache only holds data for about 30 days before it auto-purges, so we got lucky with the timing. What did you find?" He pulled up a text file filled with alphanumeric strings. Sarah scanned it without comprehension until Marcus highlighted a specific line. "Your Bodycam file, created October 3rd at 23:51, which matches when you would have docked the camera after the operation. Original size, 3 gigabytes. Normal for 94 minutes of footage. Last accessed October 4th at 03:17. Sarah did the math. "Less than 4 hours after I uploaded it." Marcus nodded. "Someone accessed that file in the middle of the night, reviewed it or copied it, and then deleted it. But look at this." He highlighted another entry. "The deletion command came from a terminal in this building. Specifically from a workstation assigned to the Property and Evidence Division." Property and evidence. Sarah felt the pieces shifting in her mind, connections forming that she did not yet fully understand. The warehouse, the deleted footage, and now a link to the department responsible for cataloging and storing physical evidence from criminal cases. "Can you tell who was logged into that terminal?" Marcus shook his head. "That is where the trail goes cold. The workstation is shared, used by multiple personnel during different shifts. No individual login was recorded at that timestamp, which means someone either used a generic administrative account or bypassed the authentication system entirely. Is that possible?" He hesitated. "It should not be, but if someone had the right access level, knew the right workarounds. Yes, it is possible." Sarah straightened, processing the information. Max returned to her side, having completed his survey of the room. She rested her hand on his back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Can you trace what was on that file? Not recover the video, but figure out what segments the system had indexed." Marcus looked uncertain. "The metadata cache does not store content details, just file properties, but—" He paused, thinking. "The indexing system creates thumbnail previews for quick browsing. Those might still exist in a separate cache. I would need time to check." "Do it. And Marcus, keep this between us for now." He nodded, something like determination settling into his features. "I will let you know what I find." Sarah and Max made their way back upstairs, navigating the labyrinthine basement corridors that most officers never had reason to visit. Her thoughts churned with questions. Property and evidence. Someone in that division had accessed and deleted her footage, but who and why? The property and evidence section occupied a secure wing on the first floor, accessible only through a reinforced door that required badge access and a secondary PIN code. Sarah had been inside dozens of times over the years, logging items from her cases or retrieving materials for court proceedings. The space was organized with military precision, rows of shelving and locked cages containing everything from recovered weapons to stolen jewelry to bags of confiscated substances awaiting destruction. The division was supervised by Sergeant Carol Hayes, a meticulous woman who had managed the department's evidence systems for over 15 years. Sarah had always found her professional and efficient, if somewhat humorless. The idea that Hayes or anyone on her team might be involved in evidence tampering seemed almost absurd. The entire function of their job was preserving the integrity of the chain of custody. And yet, Sarah decided to approach indirectly. Rather than raising suspicions with pointed questions, she would find a legitimate reason to spend time in the division, observe the operations, and see if anything struck her as unusual. The opportunity came the following afternoon. A case she had worked 3 months prior was finally moving to trial, and the prosecutor's office had requested a review of the physical evidence to ensure everything was properly documented for court. Sarah volunteered to handle the review personally, a task that normally would have been delegated to a junior officer. The evidence room was cooler than the rest of the building, climate-controlled to preserve sensitive materials. Sarah signed in at the front desk, noting the officer on duty, a young man named Peters, whose expression suggested terminal boredom. He barely glanced at her credentials before waving her toward the shelving area where her case materials were stored. Max accompanied her, as always. His presence in the evidence room was unusual but not prohibited. K-9 officers sometimes brought their partners for scent training exercises or to familiarize them with the environment. Peters did not question it. Sarah located the correct shelf and began reviewing the items logged to her case, a collection of counterfeit identification cards, the equipment used to produce them, financial records showing the scope of the operation. Everything appeared in order, properly tagged and sealed. Documentation complete. She made notes on her tablet, going through the motions while her attention wandered to the broader space around her. The evidence room was quiet at this hour, most of the staff apparently occupied elsewhere. Sarah counted 3 other officers in her line of sight, each focused on their own tasks. She recognized one of them, Detective Frank Muller from Major Crimes, pulling a box from an upper shelf with the careful movements of someone handling delicate material. Max's behavior shifted. Sarah noticed it immediately, the subtle tension in his posture, the way his nose lifted and his ears rotated. He was tracking something, not alerting, but definitely interested. She watched him, without appearing to, continuing her documentation while he worked through whatever had caught his attention. His gaze settled on a section of shelving to her left, perhaps 30 feet away. A locked cage containing bulkier items, furniture and equipment, too large for standard shelving. Sarah could see boxes stacked inside, some labeled, others anonymous. Max did not alert. Whatever he sensed was present, but not overwhelming, a trace rather than a concentration. Sarah filed the observation away and completed her review, signing out with Peters and leading Max back into the main corridor. Once they were clear of the secure wing, she paused and knelt beside her partner, scratching the spot behind his ears that always made his tail wag. "Good boy," she murmured. "You found something in there, did not you?" Max's tongue lolled out in a happy grin, but his eyes remained sharp. He knew the difference between praise and play, and this was clearly the former. Sarah needed to think carefully about her next move. Max had detected something in the evidence room, something chemically similar to whatever had triggered his alert in the warehouse. The connection was too precise to be coincidence, but she could not simply demand access to a locked cage based on a dog's undefined interest. She needed more. That night, Sarah worked late at her desk, poring over records from the Property and Evidence Division. Intake logs, disposal records, audit reports. The volume of material was staggering, thousands of items processed every month, each requiring documentation and tracking. Somewhere in this ocean of data, there had to be a thread she could follow. She found it just before midnight. The cage that had attracted Max's attention was logged as containing materials from a series of related cases, all involving stolen merchandise recovered from various locations around the city. Electronics, automotive parts, designer goods. The thefts had been attributed to a loosely organized ring of opportunistic criminals, most of whom had been arrested and prosecuted over the past year. The evidence from their cases was being held pending final disposition, after which it would either be returned to rightful owners, auctioned, or destroyed. What caught Sarah's attention was a pattern in the intake dates. Several items had been logged to this cage on October 4th, the day after her warehouse operation, the day the Bodycam footage was deleted. She cross-referenced the case numbers and found that the October 4th items were attributed to a case that had been closed months earlier. The detective of record was Frank Mueller. Sarah stared at the screen, her thoughts crystallizing around an uncomfortable possibility. Mueller had been in the evidence room earlier today. He had been pulling materials from the same section that had interested Max, and he was connected to items logged the day after her footage disappeared. She needed to talk to Marcus Webb again, and she needed to do it without alerting anyone who might be watching. The next morning brought a shift in the weather. Clouds rolled in from the west, dropping temperatures and promising rain that never quite arrived. Sarah moved through her duties with half her mind elsewhere, planning her next steps while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. She found an opportunity during her lunch break, texting Marcus with a request to meet at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the precinct. He agreed, arriving 10 minutes after her with his laptop bag slung over one shoulder and an expression of barely contained excitement. "I found the thumbnails," he said, before she could even offer a greeting. He slid into the booth across from her and pulled out a tablet, angling the screen so only she could see. "The system stores preview images for the first frame of every video segment. Your Bodycam recorded in 12-minute chunks, so there should be 8 thumbnails total." "I recovered 6. Sarah leaned forward, studying the images. They were small and grainy, captured in the low light of the warehouse operation. The first showed her perspective approaching the building, Max's form visible at the edge of frame. The second depicted the interior of the loading bay, shadows and industrial debris. The third, fourth, and fifth continued the progression through the empty space. Nothing remarkable, nothing that explained why someone had wanted the footage destroyed. The 6th image made her breath catch. It showed Max in full alert posture, sitting rigidly with his gaze fixed on something just out of frame. Behind him, partially visible in the edge of the shot, was a figure. Not one of her team members, someone else, a person who should not have been there. The image quality was too poor to identify features, just a dark shape with humanoid proportions, barely distinguishable from the shadows around it. "Someone was there," Sarah said softly. "We cleared that building. We checked every corner. How did we miss them?" "Maybe you did not miss them," Marcus replied. "Maybe they came in after you started your sweep, or maybe they were hiding somewhere your team did not search." Sarah's mind raced through the memory of that night. The warehouse had been large, but not labyrinthine. Her team had been thorough. The only area they had not fully explored was beneath the elevated office section, a cramped crawl space that had appeared inaccessible from the main floor. Could someone have been hiding there, watching them, waiting until they left? And if so, what had Max actually alerted on? Not narcotics, clearly, or the subsequent search would have found residue or packaging. Something else. Something that left a scent trace strong enough to trigger a full alert, but no visible evidence. "What were the other 2 thumbnails?" Sarah asked. "The ones you could not recover?" Marcus shook his head, completely corrupted. Either they degraded naturally or someone specifically targeted those segments for destruction. Given the timing, I would guess the latter. Because they showed something even more incriminating. Probably. Sarah sat back, processing the implications. A figure in the warehouse, present during their operation, unseen by the officers, but potentially captured on video. Someone had watched that footage within hours of its upload and decided it needed to disappear. That same someone had connections to property and evidence, and possibly to Detective Frank Mueller. She needed to confront this directly, but she also needed backup, not physical backup, but institutional support, someone with the authority to protect her if this investigation pointed where she feared it might. Captain Morrison, she decided. It was time to bring him up to speed. Morrison listened to her report with an expression that grew progressively more troubled. When she finished, he was silent for nearly a full minute, staring at the wall behind her as if searching for answers in the institutional beige paint. "Mueller," he finally said. "I have known Frank Mueller for almost 20 years. He is a good detective. Solid clearance rate, never a hint of impropriety. People can surprise you, they can." Morrison rubbed his forehead wearily. "All right, here is how we are going to handle this. I'm going to make some calls, loop in someone from internal affairs who I trust to be discreet. We need to look at Mueller's cases, his finances, anything that might indicate motive. Meanwhile, I want you to stay in your lane, normal duties, no more independent digging." "Captain, with respect, Max identified something in that evidence cage. If we could get authorization for a proper search, have him do a formal sweep." Morrison held up a hand. "I understand, and we will get there. But if we move too fast, we risk tipping off whoever is involved. They have already shown they are willing to destroy evidence. I do not want them destroying more, or worse, disappearing entirely." Sarah wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in his caution. The investigation had grown beyond a missing file. It now touched on potential corruption within the department, something that required careful handling to ensure accountability rather than cover-up. "Give me 48 hours, Morrison continued. "Let me build a framework around this, get the right people involved. Then we move. Together. 48 hours. Sarah nodded, though patience had never been her strongest virtue. Max seemed to share her restlessness, shifting at her feet with the energy of a dog who sensed unfinished business. "One thing," she said, as she rose to leave. "The figure in that thumbnail. If we can enhance the image, maybe get some identifying details." "Already thought of that. I will have our tech people take a look, off the books. If there is anything recoverable, we will find it." Sarah left Morrison's office feeling simultaneously reassured and unsettled. The wheels were turning, official machinery engaging with the problem. But 48 hours felt like an eternity when secrets might be slipping away with every passing minute. The evening shift passed without incident. Sarah and Max responded to a handful of routine calls, helped locate a missing senior citizen who had wandered away from her assisted living facility and was found contentedly feeding ducks in a nearby park, and provided backup on a domestic dispute that resolved peacefully when both parties agreed they were overreacting about the volume of late-night television viewing. Normal duties, normal rhythm. The ordinariness of it felt almost surreal against the backdrop of her private investigation. When her shift ended, Sarah drove home through streets gilded by the setting sun. Her apartment was a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, chosen specifically for its fenced backyard where Max could play and patrol. She let him out to run his perimeter checks while she changed out of her uniform and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. Max returned to the back door with a tennis ball in his mouth, his tail wagging with undimmed enthusiasm despite the long day. Sarah laughed and spent the next 20 minutes throwing the ball for him, watching him launch himself across the grass with the pure joy of a dog doing exactly what he was born to do. These moments anchored her. The simplicity of play, the uncomplicated bond between human and K-9. Whatever complexities awaited her in the investigation, this relationship remained clear and true. Max trusted her. She trusted him. Everything else was just noise. Later, after dinner and a long shower, Sarah sat on her couch with her laptop and began researching Frank Mueller. Not through official channels, which might leave traces, but through public records and social media, the digital breadcrumbs that everyone scattered without thinking. Mueller had been with the department for over 2 decades, joining as a patrol officer the same year Sarah graduated from high school. His career trajectory showed steady advancement, from patrol to detective, from property crimes to major investigations. Awards and commendations decorated his file, citations for excellent police work and community service. On paper, he was exactly what Morrison had described: a good detective, solid, reliable. His social media presence was limited, typical for older officers who had not grown up with technology as an extension of self. A Facebook profile with infrequent posts, mostly photographs from fishing trips and family gatherings. A wife, 2 grown children, grandchildren whose pictures featured prominently. The portrait of a man nearing the end of a respectable career, counting down to retirement and the comfortable life that awaited. Nothing to suggest corruption, nothing to explain why he might be involved in evidence tampering or connections to a suspicious warehouse operation, and yet Max's instincts had never been wrong. Sarah closed her laptop and looked at her partner, who had curled himself into a massive furry circle on his dog bed. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched occasionally, tracking sounds she could not perceive. "What did you find, Max?" she asked softly. "What are we missing?" He did not answer, of course, but she could have sworn his ear flicked in her direction, an acknowledgement if not a response. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Sarah arrived at the precinct to find the building buzzing with unusual energy. Officers clustered in small groups, speaking in low voices with the particular intensity that suggested significant news. She found Officer Chen near the coffee station and raised an eyebrow in question. "Internal affairs," Chen said quietly. "They showed up at 0600, escorted Detective Mueller out of the building about 30 minutes ago." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Officially? No one knows yet. But it is not voluntary. 2 IA officers, his badge and weapon collected before they left. That is not a friendly conversation. Morrison had moved faster than promised. The framework he had mentioned was apparently already in place, triggered by whatever Sarah's findings had revealed. She should have felt satisfaction, or at least relief, but instead there was only a gnawing uncertainty. Muller's removal was a start, but it was not an answer. It did not explain what had happened in that warehouse or what Max had detected. She went through her morning routines on autopilot, checking in for duty, reviewing the day's assignments, running Max through his standard exercises in the K-9 training yard. The familiar patterns helped calm her nerves, redirecting her focus from speculation to action. Mid-morning brought a summons to Captain Morrison's office. Sarah found him standing at his window, gazing out at the city with the tired expression of a man who had not slept well. "You heard about Mueller," he said without turning. "Hard to miss." IA picked him up based on preliminary findings from their financial review. Large cash deposits over the past 18 months, amounts that do not match his salary or any declared secondary income. He is claiming innocence. Says it is money from selling his father's estate, but the timeline does not add up. His father passed away 3 years ago. Sarah processed this information, so he is dirty. But dirty how? What is he actually doing? That is what we need to find out. Morrison finally turned to face her. The judge approved a warrant this morning, full search of the evidence cage that interested your dog. I want you there, you and Max. The evidence room had never felt as tense as it did that afternoon. Sergeant Hayes stood rigidly by the entrance, her expression caught between professional cooperation and personal affront. Her domain was being invaded, her procedures questioned, and though she maintained composure, her displeasure was evident in every clipped word and rigid gesture. 2 officers from Internal Affairs supervised the search, documenting everything with cameras and clipboards. Sarah stood to the side, Max alert and ready at her heel, waiting for authorization to begin. "Lieutenant Collins," one of the IA officers said, nodding toward the cage, "whenever you are ready." Sarah led Max into the enclosed space, guiding him between boxes and stacked materials with practiced efficiency. He moved with professional focus, nose working constantly, sampling the air for the scent profile he had been trained to detect. For the first several minutes, nothing registered. Max showed mild interest in several containers, but did not alert. Sarah began to wonder if whatever had caught his attention before had dissipated, or if the concentration had somehow decreased since her previous visit. Then Max froze. His posture shifted from searching to pointing, every muscle taut, his gaze locked on a large cardboard box, half hidden behind a stack of automotive parts. He sat without being commanded, his signal unmistakable. "Alert," Sarah announced, "right there." The IA officers moved in, cameras focused on the box as they carefully documented its position and labeling before lifting it down to the floor. The label attributed it to a closed case from the previous year, stolen electronics recovered from a pawnshop bust. Inside the box, beneath a layer of packaged cell phones still in evidence bags, they found a false bottom. And beneath the false bottom, wrapped in plastic sheeting, were bundles of cash and several smaller packages of white powder sealed in vacuum bags. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly as the implications settled into place. The evidence room itself, the most secure location in the building, had been turned into a hiding spot for contraband. Someone had been using the department's own systems to conceal illegal materials, hiding them in plain sight among legitimate evidence. Max had known. That night in the warehouse, he had detected traces of these substances, residue left behind by whoever had been moving materials in and out of the facility. The anonymous tip that had sent them there had probably been meant to test the department's response, to see if anyone was paying attention to the locations being used. And when the bodycam footage had captured something incriminating, possibly the figure of whoever had been present that night, it had been deleted to protect the operation. Over the next several hours, the search expanded to encompass other sections of the evidence room. Max worked methodically, his alerts leading investigators to 3 additional hidden caches. The scope of the operation became clear. Someone had been systematically using the evidence storage system as a way station for illegal goods, moving them in and out under the cover of legitimate police activity. Mueller was clearly involved, but he was not the only one. The scheme required cooperation from multiple points, people who could create false documentation, people who could access secure areas, people who could ensure that certain questions were never asked. Sergeant Hayes was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 other evidence room personnel were similarly removed. The department had been compromised from within, and the process of identifying every involved party would take weeks or months. But the core of it was exposed. The secret that someone had tried to bury was now fully visible, examined and documented and processed through the systems it had corrupted. Sarah stood outside the evidence room as the sun began to set, watching officers and investigators move in and out with boxes of seized materials. Max sat beside her, calm now that his work was done, accepting the occasional pat from passing colleagues who recognized what he had accomplished. Captain Morrison approached, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "Hell of a day." Sarah nodded. "Hell of a few days." "Muller is talking, trying to cut a deal. Looks like he was the inside man for a regional theft ring. They would steal merchandise. He would ensure the recovered goods got logged to cases that were already closed. Then they would extract the goods from evidence after the heat died down. The warehouse was one of their staging points, and the night we searched it, Muller panicked. He saw the bodycam footage, saw that your camera had caught one of his associates lurking in the building. He had to destroy the evidence before anyone else reviewed it." Sarah thought about the grainy thumbnail image, the shadowy figure at the edge of frame. A ghost that had nearly slipped away entirely. Who was it? The person in the warehouse? Morrison shrugged. "We are still working on that. Muller says he does not know names, just contacts. But we will get there. The whole network is unraveling now. Your dog pulled the thread that took it all apart." Sarah looked down at Max, who gazed back up at her with his tongue lolling happily. 7 years of partnership, hundreds of operations, countless alerts and searches. But this one felt different. This time, his nose had exposed corruption at the heart of their own house, a betrayal that cut deeper than any external threat. She knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands, looking into those amber eyes that held such uncomplicated loyalty. "Good boy," she said softly. "You did good." His tail thumped against the concrete. For Max, that was enough. The praise, the bond, the simple satisfaction of doing what he was born to do. The complexities of human motivation and institutional failure meant nothing to him. He had sensed something wrong and communicated it to his partner. The rest was human business. Sarah wished she could adopt his clarity. The revelations of the day left her feeling unsettled, her faith in the department shaken by the knowledge that trusted colleagues had been working against everything they swore to protect. But she also felt something like hope. The system had worked eventually. The corruption had been found and exposed. Accountability was coming, and at the center of it all, a dog with an extraordinary nose and an unwavering commitment to his partner had made the difference. The weeks that followed brought a cascade of consequences. Muller pleaded guilty to multiple charges and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony led to arrests across 3 states, dismantling a theft network that had operated with impunity for nearly 5 years. Hayes and 2 other evidence room employees faced their own charges for facilitation and failure to report suspicious activity. The department launched a comprehensive review of evidence handling procedures, implementing new protocols and oversight mechanisms to prevent similar compromises in the future. It was painful, embarrassing work, requiring public acknowledgement of failures that many would have preferred to ignore. But Morrison insisted on transparency, arguing that trust could only be rebuilt through honesty. Sarah testified at several proceedings, recounting the warehouse operation and the subsequent investigation. Max could not testify, of course, but his role was acknowledged in court records and department citations. He became something of a celebrity within the precinct, officers going out of their way to offer treats and praise whenever they encountered him. He accepted the attention with cheerful dignity, never letting it interfere with his work. On a bright morning, 6 weeks after the evidence room search, Sarah and Max were called to a dedication ceremony in the precinct's front lobby. A new plaque had been installed near the entrance, commemorating officers who had demonstrated exceptional integrity in the face of institutional challenges. Max's name was on the list. Sarah stood beside him as Captain Morrison read the citation, speaking of courage and instinct and the irreplaceable bond between K-9 officers and their partners. Max sat at attention throughout, his posture perfect, his ears alert to every sound in the crowded space. When the ceremony concluded and the applause faded, Sarah led him outside into the autumn sunshine. The air was crisp and clean, carrying scents of falling leaves and distant wood smoke. The city spread before them, tall buildings and busy streets, and all the countless dramas unfolding in homes and offices and corners they would never see. "Ready to get back to work?" Sarah asked. Max's tail wagged. His answer, as always, was yes. They walked together toward their vehicle, partners in every sense of the word. The case was closed, the corruption exposed. The system slowly healing itself. There would be other cases, other challenges, other moments when trust and instinct would be tested. But for now, on this perfect autumn morning, it was enough to walk side by side and know that they faced whatever came next together. The call came 3 days later, a reported burglary at a jewelry store in Buckhead. Security footage showing 3 suspects fleeing into a nearby park. K-9 unit requested for tracking. Sarah acknowledged the dispatch and guided their vehicle through mid-morning traffic, while Max stood alert in his compartment, already sensing the shift from routine to active deployment. She could see his reflection in the rearview mirror, ears forward, body tense with anticipation. The park was a sprawling green space, surrounded by upscale shopping centers and residential towers. By the time Sarah arrived, patrol officers had established a perimeter and witnesses were providing descriptions of the suspect's direction of travel. She suited Max in his working harness and led him to the last confirmed sighting point, a gap in the hedge that bordered the park's eastern edge. Max dropped his nose immediately, sorting through the layered scents until he found the trail he was looking for. They moved swiftly through the park, past joggers and dog walkers and families enjoying the pleasant weather. Max tracked with focused intensity, ignoring distractions, following the invisible ribbon of scent that the suspects had left in their wake. The trail led them to a drainage culvert at the park's northern boundary, a concrete channel that disappeared beneath a busy road. Max paused at the entrance, sampling the air, then plunged into the darkness without hesitation. Sarah followed with her flashlight raised, trusting her partner's instincts. The culvert was damp and echoing, their footsteps amplified in the enclosed space. She could hear Max's breathing ahead of her, steady and controlled, the sound of a professional at work. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber where several drainage lines converged. Max circled the space, working through the confused scent picture, then settled on a direction and continued forward. They emerged minutes later on the far side of the road, in a maintenance yard cluttered with equipment and vehicles. Max's alert was immediate, his body rigid, his gaze fixed on a cluster of dumpsters against the back fence. "Atlanta PD," Sarah announced. "Come out with your hands visible." A long moment of silence. Then, slowly, 3 figures emerged from behind the dumpsters. Young men, barely out of their teens, their expressions caught between defiance and resignation. Their pockets bulged with what Sarah suspected was stolen merchandise. The arrest was textbook. Backup arrived within minutes. The suspects were cooperative once they realized escape was impossible, answering questions with the weary compliance of people who had been caught and knew it. Sarah processed the scene with practiced efficiency, documenting the evidence and ensuring proper chain of custody for the recovered jewelry. Max sat nearby, accepting water from a patrol officer who had brought supplies. His earlier intensity now relaxed into patient waiting. As she completed the final paperwork, one of the suspects spoke up. "That dog is something else. We thought we were clear once we hit the tunnel. Never figured he could track through all that water and concrete." Sarah looked at Max, who was now accepting enthusiastic ear scratches from the same patrol officer. "He is the best partner I have ever had." The suspect shook his head, something like admiration flickering beneath his resignation. "Man, guess crime really does not pay when you got a nose like that on your trail." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. No, it really does not. The drive back to the precinct was quiet, the pleasant fatigue that followed successful operations settling over both partners. Max dozed in his compartment, his work done, his rest earned. Sarah navigated through familiar streets, her thoughts drifting across the events of the past weeks. The Bodycam mystery had started as an anomaly, a glitch in the system that most people would have dismissed or ignored. But someone had seen fit to dig deeper, and that curiosity had led to something far more significant than a missing file. It had revealed a wound in the department, a corruption that had been festering beneath the surface, and it had allowed that wound to be cleaned and healed. She thought about Muller, facing the consequences of choices that had seemed profitable at the time, about Hayes and the others, whose failures of attention had enabled crimes to flourish, about the network of thieves now facing prosecution, their carefully constructed operation dismantled by a dog's extraordinary nose. And she thought about trust, the trust between partners, between colleagues, between police and community. Trust was fragile, easily damaged by betrayal or negligence, but it was also resilient. It could be rebuilt through accountability, through transparency, through the daily demonstration of integrity in action. Sarah believed in that process. She had to. It was the foundation of everything she did. The precinct lot was half full when she arrived, the usual midday rhythm of shift changes and administrative work. She parked in her usual spot and spent a few minutes with Max in the grass strip beside the building, letting him stretch and relieve himself after the morning's exertions. Officer Chen approached as they headed inside. "Heard you caught the Buckhead 3. Nice work." Sarah shrugged modestly. Max did the hard part. "I just followed where he led." Chen grinned and reached down to pat Max's head. The dog accepted the attention with his usual gracious tolerance. "Captain wants to see you when you have a chance." "Nothing urgent," he said. "Just a check-in." Sarah nodded and made her way to Morrison's office, Max padding alongside. The captain was on the phone when she arrived, gesturing for her to sit while he concluded his conversation. She took the chair across from his desk, Max settling into his customary spot near the filing cabinet. When Morrison hung up, he leaned back and studied her with an expression she had come to recognize as his thinking face. "Good work this morning, clean arrest, no issues, thank you, sir." Morrison nodded slowly. "I wanted to talk to you about something else. The review board met yesterday. Recommendations are going to the chief next week." Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly. She knew the review board had been considering promotions and reassignments in the wake of the evidence room scandal. The department was restructuring, filling gaps left by removed personnel, rethinking how certain functions were organized. "They want to create a new position," Morrison continued, K-9 Division Liaison to Internal Affairs. Someone who can work across departmental lines, deploy K-9 assets for integrity investigations, help identify vulnerabilities before they become crises. Your name came up. Sarah absorbed this information. It was an unusual proposal, a hybrid role that would place her at the intersection of multiple departmental functions. It would mean less time on patrol, more time in meetings and consultations, a different kind of police work than she had known for most of her career. She looked at Max, who was watching her with his usual attentiveness. He would remain her partner, of course. That bond was unbreakable. But their daily routine would change, their focus would shift, their challenges would take new forms. "It is your choice," Morrison said. "No pressure either way. You have earned the right to decide what comes next." Sarah thought about the warehouse operation, the missing file, the figure in the shadows. She thought about the evidence room caches, the network of corruption, the slow process of institutional healing, that was still ongoing, and she thought about Max, whose nose had started it all, whose instincts had proven more reliable than systems and protocols and all the human mechanisms meant to ensure accountability. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Morrison smiled. "Take all the time you need." That evening, Sarah sat on her back porch and watched Max chase fireflies across the darkening yard. The lights flickered and vanished, frustrating his attempts to catch them, but he persisted with the pure joy of a dog engaged in play. She thought about the offer, turning it over in her mind like a stone from a riverbed. The new position would be challenging, meaningful, important. It would allow her to use what she had learned from the Bodycam investigation to prevent future compromises, to strengthen the systems that protected both officers and community. But it would also take her away from the streets, from the immediate connection to patrol work that had defined her career. It was a trade-off, a shift in priorities, and she was not certain how she felt about it. Max bounded back to the porch, panting happily, and dropped into a sitting position at her feet. She reached down and stroked his ears, feeling the familiar softness of his fur. "What do you think, partner? New adventure?" Max cocked his head, considering the question with apparent seriousness. Then he licked her hand and settled down with a contented sigh. Sarah laughed. "I will take that as a yes." The decision crystallized in that moment, as decisions sometimes do, not through careful analysis, but through a sudden clarity of purpose. She would accept the position. She would work to make the department better, stronger, more resistant to the kind of corruption that had nearly escaped notice, and she would do it with Max at her side, his nose and instincts serving a broader mission. The fireflies continued their dance across the yard, brief points of light in the gathering darkness. Max watched them with drowsy interest, his energy finally spent, his day complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new investigations, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Sarah felt something like peace. She had a partner she trusted, a purpose she believed in, a path forward that honored both. It was enough. It was more than enough. The stars emerged one by one above Atlanta's glow, ancient light touching a city of constant change. Somewhere in the streets below, people were living their lives, making choices, building futures. Some of those choices would be good, others less so. Some would require police attention, K-9 involvement, the patient work of investigation and accountability. Sarah would be ready. She and Max would face whatever came together, as they always had. The night deepened around them, peaceful and full of possibility. In his sleep, Max's paws twitched, chasing dreams of scent trails and successful alerts. Sarah smiled and let her eyes close, listening to the symphony of crickets and distant traffic that formed the backdrop of home. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, this moment was everything.